is humanity resistive to divine truth?
Well, the primary reasons for resistance involve around a number of factors. I would say the very first factor is a resistance to pain and suffering. So you could say that people have like a pain threshold, a scale, if you like, that they weigh the balance in.
Okay.
Like a scale, a pain scale.
Uh-huh.
They have a pain, so I'd call it the pain-pleasure scale, if you
Okay.
like. They also have some other scales as well, like, for instance, a fear-truth scale. Right? They also have a desire-apathy scale as well. And I feel it's primarily these three scales that people have internally going on inside of them that prevent them from receiving divine truth.
So can you explain to me what you mean by a scale?
Well, a scale is like an internal scale from an emotional perspective, now we're talking. Basically what we're saying is we have a pain or pleasure scale. In other words, when the pain gets too intense, we want to shut it down. Mm-hmm. We don't want to experience it. We like experiencing pleasure, so we prefer pleasure over pain. So even though we have pain in us, we prefer to feel the pleasure instead.
Yes.
Even if the pain resides within us still, we still want the pleasure. And, and in fact, we become addicted to getting our pleasures, so-called pleasures, met. Oftentimes in avoidance of the pain.
Yeah.
And then when the pleasure gets too high, we usually want to shut that down as well, ironically.
Yeah.
So that's the sad part of our existence. We are trying to maintain an emotional equilibrium that's based upon the pain and suffering that we might feel at any point in time, or the intensity of the pleasure that we might feel at any point in time. Mm-hmm. And so our decisions are not based upon logic or truth anymore. They're only based upon what can I avoid, painful-wise, and what can I have, pleasure-wise. Now, this becomes very destructive when we're doing both of these things at the same time. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would call the pain-pleasure scale.
And so we're resistive to divine truth because we don't want our pain to get higher than
Well, divine truth will expose our error and therefore our pain. Mm-hmm. So we don't want our pain to get as high as being completely exposed. It's almost like we're happy to walk around in a dark room, hitting things all the time, just so no longer tells us that we're stupid doing it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
In other words, no one gives us a torch and says, why are you walking around in a dark room bashing into things all the time? You might as well have this torch so you can see where you're going.
Yeah.
And then you'd feel really stupid, right? that torch was available to you and you could have had it and you're still bumping into things. And this is where we don't like to see even our pain exposed for even points of humiliation that we might feel. They're personal feelings.
Yes.
But we want to avoid the feeling. And so what we do is we suppress it. We'd rather remain in darkness to our pain.
And we avoid truth because it will expose that.
Yeah, truth will expose us. Truth's like a flashlight showing us the areas of pain and what the causes of those pains are. And we often wish to turn that off because we want to manage our pain. We don't want to experience our pain. And
presumably, from what we've discussed about divine truth in other questions, it can also bring us a great deal of pleasure. And if we fear overwhelming pleasure, then that would be another investment.
Not only that, but we also have addictive links to pleasure, usually, in avoidance of pain. We're trying to use pleasure to avoid pain.
Yes.
So that means often the things that we think are pleasurable are not that pleasurable, unfortunately, or particularly not pleasurable to others. And so what we do, though, is we engage in addiction-based life. Now, the truth will also expose all of our addictions. Mm-hmm. All the things we think are nice turn out to not be as nice as we thought.
So this is another reason why we resist divine truth.
Of course, because now it feels like divine truth is taking away all of our pleasures as well. Mm-hmm. So we have this problem as it's exposing all of our pain and taking away all of our pleasures. That's what we believe in the moment. It's not true. It's not reality from God's perspective.
But this is why we resist.
We resist. It's a feeling that we have. It's a belief system we have that the majority of people have. and they can't give it up because they don't. The only way to give it up is to experience the pain.
Yeah.
And the only way to give it up is to have the light shone on the addictions that turn out to not be as pleasurable as you thought. That's the only way to give it up, and they don't want to do that. So they resist the truth.
Okay, so that's one scale, the pleasure-pain scale. What about this other one you mentioned, the truth-fear scale?
Yeah, so a lot of people will only receive truth to the point that their fear is not triggered. So in other words, you know, if the truth is universal or external, they go, okay, yeah, I can accept that. So somebody comes along and says, do you realise that we can put a satellite in the sky, right, and bounce a few signals off of it so that you know where your position is anywhere on the earth within 1 metre? And you go, wow, that's a great idea. That benefits my life.
It reduces my fear.
It reduces my fear. So of course I'd love to do that. And in fact, it has a huge reduction in my fear. So of course I'm going to go for that.
Yeah.
Right? But now if another person come along and said, do you realise that you are full of emotional pain and suffering and you've got all this grief about your childhood that you've got to feel, and it's all about how your dad abused you and your mum did this and your dad did that and whatever. Now you're looking at that and you go, I don't see any immediate benefit here to addressing this particular problem. Your fear is now through the roof.
Yeah.
So where is your desire for truth? It's very, very minor and low. We only usually desire truth to the point where where we believe we're going to benefit from it. So the problem is with our beliefs again. Most of the time we believe that if we receive God's truth, it's going to result in restriction to our life. It's going to result in more fear. So a lot of people don't want to discuss things about the spirit world, for example, because they become afraid of where they're going to end up. Right?
Yeah.
They're still going to end up where they're going to end up in the end, so it doesn't make any sense to avoid it. And in fact, if they found out where they're going to end up right now and then they did something about it, they might be able to completely avoid it if they did something about it. But they don't want to because their fear goes through the roof. And when the fear goes through the roof, you then have this desire to suppress the knowledge of truth. And this is one of our problems, is that once the fear is that high and we're unwilling to feel the fear, and that's the real problem, the unwillingness to feel the fear itself, so we can, by experience, reduce it. Our fear then governs how much or what kind of truth we will accept. When the fear about a certain issue is high, we will only accept a very small portion of truth. When our fear is going to be reduced by accepting a truth, or our fear is going to be is not going to be affected at all by accepting a truth, then we readily accept it. But that unfortunately means that our fear defines what truth we will accept.
Yeah.
And all of God's truths are often exposing our fears. Now we have a lot of trouble because now what we're doing is we go, I don't want any of God's truth because it's going to expose more of my fears.
And yet the truth is, when we receive God's truth, it does expose our fears, but then it actually removes them eventually.
Well, we get to feel them, and as we feel them, we remove them.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it. The truth is the only thing, in fact, that can reduce fear. That's the sad thing about it. It's like, how do I not be afraid of knowing where I am? By having the truth of where I am. That's why a GPS unit is great. If I'm in a fixed place on the planet, right, and I don't know where I am, and then I've got a little device that tells me within a metre where I am, I now have no fear. I know exactly where I am.
Yeah.
Knowing the truth actually reduces our fear.
Yeah.
Right? That's the truth. But unfortunately, we believe opposite to that. We believe that having God's truth exposing us will expose our fears, and because we're unwilling to feel those fears, we unfortunately believe that the problem is with the truth, and so we deny it. We push the truth back away again. We don't want to experience it. And that's when we start running into trouble with the fear-truth scale.
All right, what about the third scale, the desire-apathy scale that you mentioned?
Yeah, well, this is another reason why people don't accept divine truth on the planet, is because they don't have a strong desire for it. They're apathetic about it. It's like, do you want to know the secrets of the universe? not really. I'm having enough trouble with my day-to-day life, thank you very much, type of thing. It's like...
so why are we so apathetic towards truth?
Well, in the end, we're apathetic mostly because we're suppressing pain. You know, one of the reasons, primary reasons of apathy is to try and avoid pain. If we don't have to do anything, then we get to avoid some things. We're never going to avoid them in the long run, of course. God's universe is constructed in such a way that truth is unavoidable in the end. But we want to avoid it for as long as possible. And one way of avoiding it is by just being apathetic to it, saying, I don't care, it doesn't worry me.
Yeah.
When it often does worry us, but we're just not honest, right? Unfortunately, too, we don't have a desire. We often taught from a very young age in this world, we're taught that we're never going to have anything we want actually come to us.
We better get used to it.
We better get used to it. And in fact, some parents purposefully teach their children that. Some parents actually try to withhold things from their children on purpose in order to teach the child that they're never always going to get what they want. Mm-hmm. Now, because of that, we learn to suppress our desires in order to not feel pain. So whenever you have a desire that isn't met, generally you feel a bit of pain as a result when there's an emotion inside of you about the desire that's out of harmony with love. And as a result, you feel pain. So we're taught to not desire anything. And we're taught also that some things are pointless to desire. Mm. One of those things that are pointless to desire is the truth about the universe, the truth about spiritual existence, the truth about our emotions. All of those things that are more difficult to understand, we're taught that it's impossible to know. Because we're taught or told that it's impossible to know before we begin, we have no desire to know. We think that it's impossible before we begin. And it's like telling a child, I'm never going to give you that thing, so don't even bother trying. Yeah. Now, if the child has that taught often enough and long enough to them, they will never try to get that thing, ever. Mm-hmm. Because they've been taught already to believe that. And this is the problem with our desire. We often are very, very apathetic. And as a result of apathy, we have no desire for universal truth, for God's truth. Mm-hmm. We have no desire to know what the absolute truth is. In fact, many of us now believe that it's not even possible to know. And as a result, we take no action to know. So because of that, we often then suppress desire to know, and therefore we live in apathy. Mm-hmm. And that causes us to remain stagnant and therefore in opposition to divine truth, because divine truth is going to encourage change.
It's a similar issue though, isn't it? I find in apathy there's usually a lot of anger and underneath that a lot of pain. And so with all three of the scales that you're describing, our desire for truth versus our fear, our desire versus our apathy, and what was the third one? The pleasure-pain scale. Yeah. They're all really based around our fear of pain, aren't they?
They are.
Our fear of experiencing pain, and so this is why we're so resistive to divine truth.
It's not just our fear of experiencing pain, physical pain, because most people can cope with a degree of physical pain. It's more the emotional pain and emotional suffering that we are trying to avoid. So if you look at the pleasure-pain scale, the reason why we're so focused on lives of pleasure without any consideration of whether it's loving or not, without any consideration of truth, is because we are trying to avoid the pain. We're trying to run away from how things emotionally feel to us. And it's always, in the end, the emotional part of our existence that we're avoiding rather than the physical part of the existence. So while we may be seeking physical pleasure, oftentimes it's to avoid emotional pain. While we may be seeking to avoid truth, oftentimes it's because of the emotional pain we feel when we come to acknowledgement of the truth. And while we're often suppressing desire because we don't want to feel the emotional pain of having our desires unfulfilled. So a lot of it is all about emotional pain and our inability to experience it. So the primary reason, really, in the end, why most people reject divine truth is because they do not have a desire to experience emotional pain. They don't desire to release the emotional pain, the truth of their current existence. And that is the primary reason why they reject the truth.
Thank you.